Hi, it's Justin Paperny. I am packing up to head off to Omaha, Nebraska to lecture for Mutual of Omaha. But before I hit the road, I wanted to quickly share thoughts on a call I just received from a white collar offender who's been home from prison for a little bit. And this offender, who served a couple of years for a tax crime, was complaining endlessly about the problem that he's having on federal probation. I'll admit it was a little depressing to hear, though I have a great deal of empathy because I know how hard prison is. I was there. And I know probation can be difficult, as I was on federal probation for 3 years. So after about 10 minutes, I politely cut this gentleman off and asked him to explain to me steps that he took in prison to convey to his someday probation officer that he was different than his tax fraud, and steps that he had taken while on federal probation to convince him that he was worthy of liberty. And apparently he didn't like those questions because he quickly pivoted and got back into his story of the probation officer constantly breathing down his neck. He doesn't trust him. He's always having to fill out financial documents. And he said, which I so hate to hear, I wish I would have just stayed in prison. Now, look, I've had a lot of people tell me that I would rather finish. A lot of people have told me they'd rather finish their federal prison term in prison than go to the halfway house. That I get. But to imply that federal probation is worse than federal prison is an outrageous statement. It's not true by any measure. So rather than saying outlandish things like he should have stayed in prison, I really tried to hone in on anything positive he had done while in prison to convey to his probation officer that he'd be easy to supervise. Certainly probation officers have a heavy docket, and the last thing that they want to do is throw you back in prison, though some conspiracy theorists would disagree with me. My time on probation taught me at first they're going to be tough, they're going to visit the home, they're going to make sure that you're transparent in your financials, you're doing as you're supposed to do. Then if you do, they're going to focus on other priorities. I should tell you, however, that I really set the record straight. I got off to a good start on probation as a result of work that I put in prison. As many of you know, I documented the journey through a daily blog. Certainly I could direct my probation officer to that blog. I was committed to transparency through that blog and not blaming others for my conduct, but rather showing lessons that I was learning as a result of going to prison. And towards the end of my prison term, my partner Michael Santos challenged me and suggested that I begin writing a series of letters to my probation officer. And my initial thought was, I don't even know who my probation officer is. And he said, well, what do you care? Write a letter, send it to the probation officer's office, and eventually I bet he's going to get the letter. And I said, okay, well, I can do that. And that's actually an exercise I now do with clients who are in prison. In fact, when clients have 60 to 90 days until their release, I challenge them to do exactly as I did. And I'm going to get into the letter my first letter to the probation officer in a minute. But I challenge clients within 60 to 90 days of their release to write to their probation officer to introduce themselves, to let them know how they've been productive while in prison, how they're looking forward to meeting them and getting off to a very good start on probation, that they're going to be transparent and honest, and that they're committed to continuing to make good use of this experience. And I was so pleased this morning when David Foley, who blogs on the Etica site. David is someone I highly admire. David is so on his game. He didn't send me a note to say, hey, will you review this letter from my probation officer? In fact, he said, I wrote a letter to my probation officer to introduce myself, to let him know that I'm working very hard in prison, and I just wanted to let you know that I sent it off. David is one of those clients that follow through. In fact, I have been told by some mentors and people with whom I work that I should never mention that I can't help everyone. And I would argue that I can only help those who really want to work. I'm not a lawyer who, at times lawyers, I think, acquiesce to some of their clients' requests because they're being paid. I'm not a psychologist to sit back and listen for 2 hours. If we're to work together, we have to hold each other accountable. And part of that accountability includes setting clear timelines and completion dates. So for my clients who really want to go all in, this strategy of writing letters to probation officers is simply one strategy. And for some, it's tough to even contemplate that because there's so much to do before you get there. Look at some of the courses we offer through our consulting, our blueprint. right? We got to first get through the pre-sentence investigation and writing the narrative to the court in the first person, which should shorten your sentence. Okay, then we got to get into custody and classification. You can't do anything great in prison if you're getting into trouble, so we got to do disciplinary infractions. The drug program, the right frame of mind, all of that leads to, wow, someday I'm actually going to be on federal probation. As crazy as it might seem, because I know many of you have yet to go to prison, but you might only be in prison for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, in home for decades, and it's essential that you get off to a good start. So I'm going to transition to a letter that I wrote while in federal prison. Forgive the terrible handwriting. I've broken my right wrist 4 times. I know I write like a 4-year-old. Forgive me. This is a letter that I wrote at the suggestion of my partner, Michael Santos, from prison. Dear probation officer, my name is Justin Paperny, federal inmate number 444991112. I am scheduled to report to Vinewood on Wednesday, May 20th at 1 p.m. I'm writing this letter from Taft Camp on Saturday afternoon. Thus, I will likely have surrendered to Vinewood by the time you receive this letter. I'm writing to introduce myself and to apprise you of my release plans. I recognize that you must approve and supervise my release plans, and you may expect that I will serve my term of supervised release with total respect for your authority. As you may know, I graduated from USC in 1997. Following graduation, I built a career as a stockbroker and as a real estate agent. I expect that both of those career paths closed as a consequence of my poor judgment and my subsequent felony conviction. I have given a considerable amount of thought to the ways in which I can contribute to society upon my release. Should you have interest, you may visit my blog at justinpaperny.com. I am committed to transparency. I've documented the last 7 months of my imprisonment with daily blog entries. Under separate cover, I'm asking my mother to send you a copy of Lessons from Prison. I wrote this book during confinement with hopes of helping others make better decisions. With your permission, I hope to build a career in speaking and in consulting. I recognize that I must first complete my term in the halfway house before I can lead this career in earnest. While at Vinewood, however, I intend to prepare in every way that is possible without violating any rules. I expect to work as an office clerk at Sotheby's Realty in Calabasas while I transition into society. You may have guidance and questions for me. I look forward to providing you with full disclosure and exceeding all of your expectations. With enthusiasm, I look forward to meeting your acquaintance. Until then, I wish you Godspeed. Sincerely, Justin Paperny. Now, there was no email when I was in prison, so I'd write it in my terrible handwriting. My dear mom would type it onto a Word document. She'd send it to me, I'd sign it, and we sent it off to the probation office in Woodland Hills. And when I shook hands with my probation officer in the halfway house, one of the first things he said to me was, I really appreciated your letter. So in closing, to thrive, we must think differently, avoid the boredom of imprisonment, and create strategies that will ease your transition to society. I believe your transition will be easier if you have a probation officer that believes in you and trusts you. And in my case, he was so, I think, impressed with my efforts, he allowed me to work from home and build a career despite owing criminal restitution. Defendants frequently reach out to me and say, I've lost my career. I've lost my licenses. And what do I do? How did you do it? I've read you can't do this or you can't do that. You can't travel. Nonsense. I traveled more than 40 times on probation. I'm going to Nebraska tomorrow, but within my first year of release, I visited Arkansas 4 times. I went to New York. I went all over the country to lecture and to speak. Why? Because I was transparent. I made it clear that I was building this business and that I had few other opportunities as a result of my conviction. So for those of you, if people come across my work are going to prison, it's a family member trying to support someone in prison, or you're a lawyer looking to do some research on behalf of a client, whatever pot you fall into, embrace different strategies to thrive through the journey. And if you do, your transition to probation, which someday will come, will be easier. Follow my lead, write a letter. If you'd like a copy of this poorly written letter in a more easily readable format, let me know. I'll happily send it to you as a template that you can follow. Any questions, feel free to call 818-424-2220. More videos coming soon, so make sure to opt into our YouTube channel to automatically get notified. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.